Well, it's wonderful to see you, Betsy. It's always wonderful to see you, and it's really a treat to be able to work on your music and play your music. And we're really lucky with Orchestra Toronto this season with you as the composer in residence for this year and next year. And one of the things that we're doing, of course, is this upcoming concert. We're programming your violin concerto.
Yeah.
And which you wrote for your daughter Erika.
Yes.
And one of Canada's premier violin virtuosos,
Yeah.
and so it's all fantastic. And the one question I just wanted to start with is that it's called, on my score, it's called Faces of Woman.
Yes.
And as opposed to Faces of a Woman, or The Faces of Women, or anything. Could you tell me something about the title, how that works?
Well, you know, when I started writing it, I wanted to write something specifically for Erika as a violinist and as a girl growing up, a young girl growing up. So each of the movements has its own title. The first one is kind of romantic, a young girl. Second one is the waltz with trio, waltz with trio, that's what I called it, yeah. And then the third one is mystery, the mystery of the woman, and of course the fourth one is the Sybil, which gets to show off her technique, you know, that's kind of a typical thing. But when I wrote it, I wanted it specifically to be for her. But then later on, I started to worry because I thought, does this mean only women can play this concerto? And it's something I thought about, and I took the name Faces of Woman off for a while. But then when she made the recording for my CD, I put it back on because I think titles lend something, some insight to the music.
Right. The Sybil movement is really a thorny movement at the beginning, and it seems to be the one that's the most, let's say, atonal to begin with, at least, you know. And then it seems to be less so as it goes on.
It does, yeah.
And the other movements all seem to have a very different. I feel it's a different style. It's always your style, but the first movement makes me think a little bit of being out. It's almost like reading the Bronte sisters or something. There's something very romantic about it, as you mentioned, and there's something innocent about it, and it's also very lush, you know.
This is the first movement.
The first movement.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. I love the violin. I had to listen to. I listened to a lot of concertos before I started this. I listened just to get it, you know, get the feel for it. And then I write whatever I'm going to write. And the way I write is whatever comes next, comes next. And then I go away from it and I come back and I can tell if it's good or not. And I just adjust a few notes here and there sometimes. And sometimes I say, no, this isn't going to work at all. So that's the way I write. But the first movement, I specifically wanted it to be like, you know, typical violin concerto type music.
Because the second movement it's a waltz.
Yeah.
But there's something a little bit, I don't know, a little bit devilish in it.
Yeah, like Catch a Turn or something.
Yeah, I think Prokofiev a a little bit, you know, sometimes.
Too, yeah.
Yeah, you know, because of the shifting all the time, the shifting of the keys.
Yeah, I do that.
Yeah.
And people hate it, and I hate it too sometimes because I don't know what key to put things in. I don't know how to spell notes. I should tell you, my grandson is a jazz pianist. And so is both, they're twins. Both grandsons study jazz. And jazz theory is so different from classical theory because you don't have to worry about the key or you go from the bass note and build it up from there. So it's a lot easier. I think it'd be easier for the musicians too. Because I don't know how many times, I don't know whether it should be an F sharp or a G flat. And I labor over that. I think, well, where am I going? I waste more time fussing over that. And then I finally just get out my elbow and I say, what do I want to see? And that's what I put.
This actually made me think of something else because one time when we talked, I think when we first got to know each other, we were talking about how, I asked you how you began becoming a composer. And I thought that was a completely fascinating story because you were an oboist, you were the principal oboe of the Regina Symphony, you were with the Atlantic Symphony before then. I know that you studied at Eastman, right? And with your husband, with Dick, principal trombone. You ended up settling in Regina, but at some point you decided you had some time. Maybe you should tell the story.
Okay, well, what happened was the Atlantic Symphony did a lot of touring. And when I had Erika, she was my third child, it just seemed like we were on the road all the time. And it wasn't right. So Dick got a job at the University of Regina teaching trombone, lower brass, and theory. And I went from being principal oboe in the, I think it was the only orchestra that was doing CBC broadcasts, maybe there were two. It was a full-time orchestra, to a housewife. So that left a certain amount of spare time. I played in the Regina Symphony, but that wasn't a full-time job. And so I decided, at that time I didn't think I could compose, because there were no role models, I couldn't imagine. But the composition teacher there, Tom Schudel, always wanted to write pop tunes. So we decided we were going to write Schudel and Raum hits. So I wrote the poetry and he wrote the tunes. We had someone record them. He went down to Nashville to try to sell them. No success. So we decided we would write an opera. So I wrote a libretto, the final bid, you saw that.
Right.
I wrote an opera, and a year went by and he didn't do anything with it. So he said, why don't you write the music? I thought, me? Write the music? And so I did. I started, took one of the arias, and I wrote the music, and I thought, is this what composing is? You write something you want to hear. And that's what it was. And then there was no looking back. And the CBC picked up on that opera, and that was the first thing I wrote, an opera. And then it just went from there.
Most composers don't start with an opera. Most composers start with piano pieces.
Yeah.
Then they get bigger and bigger, and usually by the end of their career they say, well, I'll try an opera now.
Yeah.
And this is
I don't play
something.
piano well enough to write a piano piece. But I had played so many operas. This is the thing, the greatest teacher for me was being a musician. Playing in the orchestra, playing in the pit for operas, I knew how it all fit together. And of course I studied form and theory. Theory is very important to study. Counterpoint, I studied all that at Eastman.
So with this concerto that you wrote for Erika, which I believe was in the mid-90s, am I right?
Yeah, 93.
93, and there's a film that was done by your daughter Rebecca, am I right?
Jessica.
Jessica, I'm sorry.
Made a film with CBC.
That's right.
For this, yeah.
And it's available for viewing, I think.
It is, yeah. If you Google like mother, like daughter.
So we'll put the link
Yeah.
down below so you can watch.
Yeah.
It's a fascinating document to see. But afterwards, this concerto received its premiere by the Regina Symphony.
Yes.
And then it's been performed over the years a few times. When we
By
first
you?
met, yes. I saw it and was fascinated by the idea, and that's how I got to know you.
Yeah.
So I have a great deal of sentiment towards this piece of music. and with Erika. And here we go again. And are you excited by this?
Oh, yeah. And it's also pretty exciting to play in the orchestra, although it's a little nerve-wracking too. I cannot listen to her or I'm going to get distracted. Because I play, and it's true, you suddenly forget you're playing in the orchestra and you're a member of the audience. I should also mention the second movement, some of the music, I use music that Erika wrote. She also composes.
Right.
And she wrote some music for Jessica's wedding.
Right.
And she left the music now. If you could have seen it, you'll wonder how I ever interpreted what she wrote. But because it's, it's in manuscript. But she left the music at the house, and I thought, wouldn't it be neat to put this in the piece? So I put that in the piece, and I also have a spot where you have the trombone,
Yep.
her father,
That's right.
the oboe, and the violin, and we're playing a little trio in that section. And then in the last movement, she had written some music for Erika to march out, and I used that, only I made it minor, which is very strong.
Boom, 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 boom. Is that the one?
Yeah.
Ah, okay. I'm sorry, I sing off pitch.
That's not it.
Okay.
It's where she does the double stops. Everybody stops. Yum, da-da-dum, ba-da-dum, ba-da-dum.
Oh, okay.
That section.
Yeah.
It sounds like Bach.
I know which part you're talking about right now. It's a fascinating piece of music. It's a great deal of fun to work on. It's a very deep piece of music, and it is going to be a beautiful event. We're doing this concert with Brahms Symphony No. 1, and also Beethoven's Overture to Fidelio. And the reason for this pairing is that I feel that Brahms Symphony No. 1 and Fidelio both have a sense of heroism.
Yeah.
And because for me, your piece takes the idea of a woman in a very heroic way. And looking at all the different facets of how a woman is through the violin and through the orchestra. And so Fidelio, of course, is the story of a woman saving her husband from a dictator. And then Brahms, Symphony No. 1, it's about heroic overcoming a challenge, which was a great, huge disappointment in life. So,
and it's also probably my favorite symphony.
And there we go. I'm just so happy to have you with me to talk about this, and to have you in the orchestra to play this concert and to be able to do your music.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.